This is how big tobacco made junk food insanely addictive. You may not know this, but in the 1980s, tobacco companies Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds purchased General Mills, Kraft, and Nabisco, makers of processed foods including Oreos, Snackwell crackers, Kraft mac and cheese, Teddy Grahams, Oscar Mayer hot dogs. You know the things I'm talking about. By the early 2000s, in the wake of consumer pressure and negative opinions of these tobacco companies, R.J. Reynolds and Philip Morris exited the processed food world, but not before they had left their mark. During the time that they owned these companies, they used the cigarette, the big tobacco playbook, to make the foods that Kraft, Nabisco, and General Mills made even more hyperpalatable, even more addictive, and that has had a lasting negative impact on the health of Americans ever since. In a recently published study, researchers from UCSF compared 105 foods that were the best-selling products from brands owned by Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds between 1988 and 2001, with 587 similar products sold by competing brands not owned by tobacco companies. They found that the foods from the tobacco-owned companies were 80% more likely to contain combinations of carbohydrates and salt, making them hyperpalatable, highly addictive, and incredibly difficult to stop eating compared to the foods from the non-tobacco-owned companies. Basically, the tobacco companies were using their knowledge of how to get people addicted to cigarettes and applying it to junk food to make these even more addictive and to make you and your family unhealthier in the process. So what we find today in 2024 is an incredibly hyperpalatable, incredibly addictive, incredibly nutrient-poor set of ultra-processed foods that are available to most Americans. And we now know that a big part of the reason these ultra-processed foods are so addictive is because they were once owned by big tobacco who used their cigarette playbook against you.
Something wonderful happens when you change to Philip Morris.